I never imagined the HOA could build a mall on my property, until I found out I was the one who sold it. It's funny how life can take a turn you never saw coming. You wake up one day, feeling like everything is going well. Your house, your garden, your quiet little neighborhood. You think things are good, you trust the people around you. But then, suddenly, everything changes. This all started with a simple, innocent decision. I've lived in the same neighborhood, Pine Ridge Estates, 4 years. It's a peaceful community, surrounded by trees, the kind of place where people still wave to each other from their porches. I've got my house, a small garden in the backyard, and a family that loves this quiet life as much as I do. But then, one day, I received a letter from the Homeowners Association. At first, I didn't think much of it. They send letters all the time. They've got rules about the lawns, the fences, the paint colors. Everyone in the neighborhood knows the drill. The HOA's job is to keep everything neat and orderly. It's all harmless enough. Or so I thought. I remember the exact moment I opened that letter. It was a Friday afternoon, just after I got home from work. The letter had that crisp, white envelope with the HOA's logo at the top. I unfolded it and started reading. Dear Mr. Johnson, this letter serves as a formal request for you to sell a portion of your property for community development purposes. We have identified this land as ideal for future commercial expansion and are prepared to offer you a fair market price. I blinked, rereading the line again. A portion of my property? The HOA wanted me to sell part of my land for some kind of community development? I couldn't believe what I was reading. I'd lived here for over 10 years. The HOA had always seemed harmless. Sure, they had their rules, but they'd never done anything outrageous. A commercial expansion? A mall on my land? I wasn't sure what to make of it, so I did what anyone would do in my situation. I called them up to ask what was going on. I dialed the number on the letter and waited as the phone rang. A smooth voice answered, Pine Ridge Estates HOA. How can I assist you? This is James Johnson, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I received a letter about selling part of my property. I just want to understand what's going on here. The voice on the other end paused for a moment before responding. Yes, Mr. Johnson. We are looking to purchase a small section of your land. It's part of a long-term plan to improve the neighborhood by adding some commercial spaces. We're looking to build a mall. It'll increase property values, and the area will benefit from new retail and dining options. Wait, a mall? I asked, my voice rising. You want to build a mall on my land? Yes, Mr. Johnson, the voice replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It's a great opportunity for the neighborhood. The zoning for your property has already been adjusted. The HOA is in charge of the project. All we need is your agreement. I felt a lump form in my throat. Something didn't sit right. I've never been told about any of this, I said, trying to stay composed. I thought this neighborhood was supposed to remain residential. I never agreed to any changes in zoning. Well, the development plan has already been discussed and approved by the HOA board, the voice said, almost dismissively. All we need is for you to sign the paperwork, and we can begin construction. I was taken aback. The idea that the HOA could just take my land and build a mall without any consultation was absurd. I had never even heard of a community plan for something like this. I don't know about this, I said, trying to gather my thoughts. I need to think about it. Of course, Mr. Johnson, the voice replied. We understand it's a big decision. Just know that we're offering a fair price for your property. And if you refuse, we'll have no choice but to take legal action. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Legal action? What was going on here? I hung up the phone, still in disbelief. I sat there for a moment, staring at the letter. How could this be happening? The HOA was supposed to protect my property, not steal it. This wasn't just about some community project. It was about something much bigger. I started to do some research. I pulled up the property records for my house and checked the zoning laws. Everything seemed fine, at least at first. But as I dug deeper, I started to uncover things I didn't like. The zoning had been altered without notice to the homeowners, and now they were trying to force us to sell. I started asking around the neighborhood. I went to my neighbor Linda's house first. "Hey, have you heard about this mall thing?" I asked, showing her the letter. Linda frowned. "Yeah, I got one too. At first, I thought it was a joke. I didn't know what to think. But then I heard it was real." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well, some people in the neighborhood are saying that the HOA has been planning this for a while," Linda explained. "They've been slowly buying up properties, convincing homeowners to sell. But now they want more, and they're pressuring everyone to sign." I was stunned. I never thought the HOA would turn into a monster like this. They were supposed to be our protectors, not our enemies. As I walked around the neighborhood, I began to piece together a disturbing picture. I spoke to more neighbors, and it was clear that the HOA had been manipulating everyone. Some homeowners had sold without realizing the full scope of the development. Others had been offered a good price for their land, but were now regretting it. I stopped by Tom's house, an older gentleman who'd lived here longer than most. He was sitting on his porch, sipping a cup of coffee. "Tom, what do you know about this mall thing?" I asked. Tom put his coffee cup down, his face grave. "I knew something was up. They've been buying up land for months, but they kept it quiet. I didn't think much of it. But now it's a whole different story." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "James, you need to be careful. I heard that the HOA has been working with developers and contractors. This is about money. Big money. They don't care about the neighborhood anymore." I felt my stomach twist. The HOA had sold us all out, all for profit. They were using their position to turn our peaceful homes into a money-making venture. I spent the rest of the day trying to process what I had learned. I had always trusted the HOA. They were supposed to be looking out for us, not exploiting us. But now I was faced with a decision: sell or fight back. That night I couldn't sleep. The idea of a mall being built on my property made my skin crawl. The thought of my neighborhood changing forever was too much to bear. I had to take action. I decided to call a lawyer. I needed someone who understood what was happening and could help me figure out my options. The lawyer, Dylan, listened carefully as I explained everything. "This is a tough situation, James," he said after a pause. "The HOA has a lot of power, and it looks like they've been doing this to other people in the neighborhood too. But that doesn't mean you have to give up your land." Dylan outlined my legal options. I could fight the HOA in court, but it would be a long, drawn-out battle. They had deep pockets and were willing to do whatever it took to get their way. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. The following morning, I knew I had to start gathering evidence. The HOA was moving fast, and I couldn't afford to wait any longer. I reached out to Dylan again, and he suggested that I start by collecting all the documents related to the land sale. He also advised that I get my hands on any zoning changes, planning documents, and any records that could prove the HOA's role in this mess. I went straight to the county's office, where the property records were stored. The clerk there was a nice woman, but she looked at me like I was wasting her time when I asked for the zoning documents. "You're not the first one to ask about this," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "People around here are starting to realize that things aren't quite what they seem with this community project." My heart sank. If people were already talking, then the HOA's plans were even bigger than I thought. After hours of digging through dusty files and old maps, I found what I was looking for: the zoning change requests that had been made months before I received my letter. The documents showed that the HOA had been working with developers to rezone residential property into commercial land, quietly moving forward with their plan to build a mall. They'd manipulated the zoning laws to serve their interests, all while promising homeowners like me that it was for community development. I photocopied the documents and stuffed them into my bag, but the sinking feeling in my chest didn't go away. The HOA had been setting this up for months, and I had been completely blind to it. I hadn't just been tricked. I'd been sold out by the people who were supposed to protect my interests. As the days passed, I began to reach out to more of my neighbors. I'd already talked to Tom and Linda, but now I needed to gather as many voices as I could. I didn't know how many people had been affected by this, but I had a gut feeling that the more I asked around, the more I would find. I stopped by Maria Garcia's house next. She'd lived in Pine Ridge Estates longer than most, and I figured if anyone knew what was really going on, it would be her. She invited me in, and after we exchanged pleasantries, I showed her the documents I'd uncovered. Maria's face turned pale as she flipped through the zoning papers. I knew they were up to something, she whispered, shaking her head. But I didn't realize how far they'd go. James, this isn't just about you. This is about the whole neighborhood. They've been making deals with developers behind our backs. Maria began to tell me about her experiences with the HOA. She'd had issues with them in the past. Small things like being fined for having too many flowers in her garden or for painting her fence the wrong shade of gray. She'd always assumed they were just doing their job. But now, it seemed like their job had turned into something much more sinister. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were building an empire. I've got records too, Maria said, pulling out a thick folder from her bookshelf. I've been keeping track of all the fines, all the selective enforcement. It's not just you, James. It's all of us. If we don't do something now, they'll keep pushing us out one by one. That's when I realized something. I wasn't alone. This wasn't just my fight. It was the fight of everyone in Pine Ridge Estates. The HOA had turned our peaceful neighborhood into a battleground, and they were using their power to manipulate us all. But together we could take them down. I spent the next few days meeting with more neighbors. The Rodriguez family, the Wilsons, and even the Reynolds family. Everyone had been affected by the HOA's actions in one way or another. Some had already sold their land to the HOA, while others had been threatened with fines or property damage. The more I learned, the more I realized just how deep the HOA's influence went. Tom, the guy I talked to earlier, turned out to be a former member of the HOA's landscaping committee. He'd left after questioning some contracts and practices. Now he was helping me gather more information. I've got a few things that might help, Tom said one evening, as we sat in his kitchen. I've got copies of contracts that show Judith's brother-in-law was getting preferential treatment from the HOA. And I know for a fact that they've been inflating prices for landscaping services. I looked at him, shocked. They've been profiting off of us this whole time? Tom nodded grimly. They're using their position to make money. And that's why they're pushing to expand. The more land they can take, the more control they have. It's not about community development anymore. It's about power and profit. I felt a surge of anger. How had I let this happen? How had we all let this happen? But I wasn't going to let it go any further. It was time to fight back. The next step was clear. We needed to expose the HOA's corruption. The documents Maria and Tom had provided were crucial, but we also needed concrete proof that they were breaking the law. We needed to gather enough evidence to show that this was bigger than just a zoning issue. It was a case of criminal activity. We couldn't go to the police just yet. Not without something solid to back us up. But we did know that the HOA had made a critical mistake. They'd been sloppy. And if we were smart, we could turn that sloppiness into our advantage. I decided to start gathering footage. I set up security cameras around my property, hoping to catch something on film that would prove the HOA was involved in illegal activities. Meanwhile, Maria and Tom started reaching out to the press. If we could get media attention, it would put pressure on the HOA to back down. But the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. People were starting to notice the changes. The construction trucks, the zoning signs, the new HOA notices popping up on doors. People had started asking questions, and the HOA was getting nervous. I could feel it in the air. Something was about to snap. One night, as I walked home from a meeting with the neighbors, I noticed something strange. There was a large truck parked across the street from my house, its headlights shining into my yard. The driver was sitting in the truck, but he wasn't doing anything, just watching. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew the HOA had people watching us, but this was different. This wasn't just a contractor checking on the property. It was someone keeping an eye on me. Someone who knew I was starting to uncover the truth. I walked inside quickly, locking the door behind me. My phone buzzed almost immediately. It was a text from Tom. They're watching. Be careful. We need to act fast. I wasn't going to be intimidated, but I knew we had to be careful. If we were going to win this fight, we had to be smart. We couldn't afford to make a mistake. The room was in absolute chaos. People were shouting, pointing fingers, and demanding answers. Judith was red-faced, her hands shaking as she tried to control the room. But it was clear her grip on the situation was slipping. "Enough!" Judith finally shouted, banging her gavel, but the damage was done. The truth was out. The crowd was no longer afraid of her. Maria stood up, her voice steady. "You've lied to all of us, Judith. You've been using this neighborhood to line your pockets while destroying everything that made it a community. We won't stand for it anymore." I glanced around the room. The neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak out were now standing tall, their eyes full of fire. Tom, Linda, Maria, and even the Rodriguez family, people I had barely known just a few weeks ago, were all in this fight now. We weren't just a group of homeowners anymore. We were a movement. Judith tried to push back, but the weight of the evidence was too much. The video footage of Marcus poisoning my water tanks, the fraudulent contracts, the selective enforcement. It was all there, laid out for everyone to see. "I'm calling for a vote," I said, raising my voice above the clamor. "A vote of no confidence in the board. We've had enough of being manipulated. Enough of being lied to." The room quieted, and all eyes turned to me. The HOA board was visibly uncomfortable, but they had no choice now. The support from the neighbors was overwhelming. Judith could try to control the room with her power and influence, but in the face of truth, she was powerless. Maria spoke up again. "This vote is not just about ousting Judith. It's about taking back control of our community. We want transparency. We want fairness. And we want leaders who actually care about this neighborhood." The tension in the air was thick as the vote was called. One by one, neighbors raised their hands. I could feel my heart pounding as I looked around the room, waiting for the final tally. It wasn't even close. The vote passed by an overwhelming majority. Judith, Marcus, and the entire HOA board were ousted, and the community regained control. The moment the vote was counted, there was an eruption of cheers and applause. Neighbors hugged each other, some wiping tears from their eyes. We had done it. We had taken back our neighborhood from the clutches of corruption. Judith stood up, her face ashen, her expression one of disbelief. She tried to argue, tried to claim that the vote was invalid, but no one was listening to her anymore. The community had spoken. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. It was over. But as Judith and Marcus were escorted out, I knew that this victory was just the beginning. It wasn't enough to just remove them from power. We had to make sure this kind of thing never happened again. The following weeks were filled with legal battles. The evidence we had collected was irrefutable, and Dylan, the lawyer who had been helping us, was determined to make sure the HOA paid for their actions. Judith and the board members were hit with multiple lawsuits: property damage, fraud, environmental contamination, and even conspiracy charges. It was clear that the HOA's corruption went much deeper than any of us had realized. The police investigation was underway, and the truth about the illegal activities of the HOA began to surface in the media. The community, once so divided, was now united in a shared goal: to ensure that our neighborhood was restored to what it once was. The fight was far from over, but we had taken the first crucial step toward making things right. With the corrupt HOA board removed, the new board that was elected was a complete turnaround. We had made sure that the new leadership was transparent, fair, and, most importantly, dedicated to restoring the integrity of the neighborhood. The mall development was stopped, and the land that had been taken from me was returned to its original zoning. It wasn't just about my property, it was about all of us. We had fought to protect what was ours, and now the community could finally begin to heal. The once pristine lawns that had been stripped of personality began to flourish again. Gardens were planted, fences were painted with personal touches, and families were once again able to live freely in their homes without fear of arbitrary fines or threats. As I walked through the neighborhood, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. It seemed like so long ago that I had been sitting in my living room, reading that letter from the HOA, completely unaware of the storm brewing around me. What started as a fight to protect my property turned into something much bigger. It wasn't just about my garden anymore. It was about reclaiming our right to live freely, to make our own decisions without fear of being manipulated by a group that was supposed to protect us. I had learned something important through all of this. When you stand up for what's right, you're never truly alone. The people in this neighborhood, people I barely knew, came together in a way that I never could have imagined. And together, we won. As the dust settled and the neighborhood began to rebuild, I found myself walking through my garden again, feeling a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in months. The heirloom tomatoes I had been so worried about were growing strong, their leaves lush and green. The peppers were thriving once more, just as they had before the HOA's interference. I looked around at the familiar sights of Pine Ridge Estates, the houses with their colorful gardens, the trees lining the streets, the families out for evening walks. This was the community I had always loved, the community I had fought to protect. The fight was over, but the lessons we had learned would stay with us. We had reclaimed our neighborhood, and we had done it together. And I knew, deep down, that no matter what came next, we would be ready. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sunset over the neighborhood, I thought about everything that had happened. The battle had been long, and there had been moments where I wasn't sure we would win. But we did. We stood up to the HOA, and in the end, we took back our community. I smiled to myself, knowing that this wasn't just my victory. It was the victory of everyone who had been brave enough to speak out. And I couldn't help but think of one final lesson I had learned throughout this whole process. One person can spark a change, but when that person is backed by a community that refuses to back down, anything is possible. When you're fighting for what's right, the road is never easy. But as I've learned, sometimes it takes standing up to the hardest of challenges to bring a community together. And when you do, you can change everything.